Okay, so welcome everyone to the Cambridge Art Association's talk put on as a part of the exhibit right now at Canal. The exhibit is Inspiring Change for the Climate Crisis, and it's put on by a group called I3C, and the curator of this show is Adriana Pratt, and she's joining us with Rachel Licker. And so Adriana, please take it from here.
Yeah. Yeah, well, hi everyone. I know all of you. It's great to be in a family setting. And I'm very excited tonight to introduce you to Dr. Rachel Licker. Um, Rachel is a principal climate scientist with the Climate and Energy Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. In her role, she provides strategic thinking and technical and analytical expertise across the organization, analyzes new developments in climate science, and communicates climate science to policymakers, the public, and the media. Prior to joining UCS, Rachel completed a Science and Technology Policy Fellowship at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And she was serving in a capacity as a Foreign Affairs Officer with the U.S. Department of State, where she managed to work with the Global Environmental Facility Trust Fund. And before that, Dr. Licker completed her postdoctoral training at Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs. During that time, she also served as a chapter scientist and contributed author with the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Working Group 2. Dr. Licker, Rachel, earned her PhD in Environmental and Resources and her BS in Biology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She also holds an MS in Environmental Studies and Sustainability Science from Lund University in Sweden. Rachel has been quoted in a number of media outlets, including BuzzFeed News, CNN, NBC News, and NPR, among others. I am delighted to have Rachel speak to us about her expertise and hopefully inspire us more and more about climate and change. Thank you. Rachel, please.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. It's really a pleasure to be with you all. And from the outset, I just want to kind of set the table where I welcome and encourage discussion and dialogue. I have somewhat limited remarks in the hopes that we can reserve some significant time for discussion on this topic of climate and change is really what kind of in line with what the exhibit is about. I'm really hoping that we can have an engaging discussion tonight about how do we create change and get into the pathway and into the future that we hope for. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Just bear with me for a moment. Okay, I think we should be good. It looks okay. You can see my slide. Okay, great. And excellent. So yeah, again, Rachel Licker with the Union of Concerned Scientists. Our headquarters are just down the street in Cambridge. We were founded by professors who were at MIT back in the 60s when there was concern about nuclear warfare. And since then, we have expanded into a variety of different domains, including climate change, work on food and environment, clean transportation, and also the role of science in a healthy democracy. So we're a nonprofit organization. We have members from across the country. We work really mostly on domestic issues, but are kind of expanding into international issues as well. And we really try to put science forward to create a healthier and safer future. That's sort of our vision. So what I wanted to start with here in this talk is laying out some of the findings from the latest science from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. This is a report where it's born out of the United Nations system, and it's meant to synthesize and assess science for policymakers. And they have these assessment cycles that happen every approximately 7 years. And so the latest report came out in 3 installments, which you can see sort of the snapshots of the report covers here. The first on the physical science basis, then one that looks at impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability, and the last one on mitigation and climate change. Then they do a synthesis of all of that, which you may have heard about in the news about 1 or 2 months ago. And I wanted to start with this statement, this conclusion from the IPCC report, which says that the cumulative scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and planetary health. Any further delay, again, any further delay in concerted anticipatory global action on adaptation and mitigation will miss a brief and rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. Now, for myself, I found statements such like as this one really sobering and poignant, because when you go back in time and look at some of the report findings from these kinds of reports, they weren't so laser focused, clear, and direct on where we are, what's at risk, and what we need to do. And so I just was really taken, I would say, by the latest IPCC report in how they spell things out so clearly and in no uncertain terms. So I wanted to now shift to, again, I'm going to be focusing on some of the IPCC report findings. Where are we now? I'd start there. So this figure is showing you greenhouse gas emissions over time, starting in 2000 and then projected out to the end of this century. The black is showing you historical emissions to date, and then where we could go from there. And so the red line is showing you what would happen if we stuck with those policies that have been implemented. And those show that current implemented policies would lead to warming of about 3.2 degrees Celsius, with a rather large range around that. It could go anywhere from about 2.2 to 3.5 degrees Celsius. And, that's in part uncertainty because of climate modeling, and in part uncertainty on exactly what's going to happen and what implemented policies could mean. But now drawing your eye down to what it would take to get warming limited to 2 degrees Celsius, that's the green line, or 1.5 degrees Celsius, the blue line, you can see those are very different pathways. There's a lot of space between where we are at, where we are headed, and where I think ideally, according to the Paris Agreement and the latest science, we really should be. And so one thing that the IPCC report makes clear is that, very unfortunately, we are very likely to bypass the 1.5 degrees Celsius target in the coming decade. That was a finding that hit the climate movement very hard, because that has been a rallying cry from marginalized communities, 1.5 to stay alive. So what does it mean if we bypass that target? What do we do? What then? It raises a lot of existential questions of, do we give up? My very quick answer there is no. And the reason for it is that every fraction of a degree matters, because it translates into impacts avoided in a safer future. So we have to keep our eye focused on, solving this problem still as much as possible. So the report also, and I'll return back to that and get into some of the solutions and emission pathways a bit more. But I just want to make clear that the report states in no uncertain terms that limiting warming to, again, either of these two targets, 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels, would involve rapid, deep, and in most cases, immediate greenhouse gas emission reductions. And what that really means, greenhouse gas emission reductions, is getting off of fossil fuels, because these reports are very clear that greenhouse gas emissions, by and large, come from the combustion of fossil fuels, those fuels that are used to power our cars, airplanes, our industries, heat our homes, etc. And so now I wanted to turn to what these different scenarios could mean. So this figure I thought was really fabulous. This is showing the level of global warming that different generations have experienced to date. Starting at 1900, it's showing you the global temperature change above historical levels. So getting warmer as colors get warmer. And what future generations are likely to experience under different global warming scenarios. So starting at the very bottom of the figure, you can see for those who were born around 1950, what the global average temperature was at that time. And then in 2020, for those that are about 70 years old, what the global average temperature is now. And then going up from there, you can look at generations born around 1980 and what the world could look like if you go on a very high emission scenario, high, intermediate, low, or very low. And you can see the consequences, the world that one could live in, the extent to which future generations experience a hotter world with more climate change depends on the choices we make right now. And so with that, I wanted to zoom in a little bit to North America and focus on two impacts, examples of some of the kinds of impacts that we are experiencing and are likely to experience. The top is showing you extreme heat and the bottom is showing you extreme precipitation. So this is actually supposed to be sort of a map of the world with North America. If you kind of like abstract and think of this in abstract terms, you can see, okay, yeah, North America is sort of those cluster of hexagons off to the top left here. And the color is showing you where things have increased and where extreme heat has increased with a high level of confidence, where there is low agreement in any change is gray. So you can pretty much see the whole world has experienced an increase in extreme heat. And what we're seeing from the report, from the IPCC report, in terms of projections, is that drought and fire weather are projected to continue increasing in the future in the Western and Central United States. And in that part of the country, we're also expected to see an increase in extreme precipitation, an increase in river and fluvial flooding, and projected increases in precipitation in the northern part of Central North America in winter. And I will drill in deeper into more specifics of climate impacts, but I just wanted to kind of start out with this broad brush. And then the bottom is showing you observed changes in heavy precipitation around the world, again, with the dark green color showing you areas with an increase with high levels of confidence in that observed change, with the gray color showing you lower confidence levels in detectable changes. But from that, you can see that there have been detectable increases in extreme precipitation in Eastern North America. And moving forward, we're likely to see in that part of the country expect increases in river and fluvial flooding. So from there, I wanted to dig in a little bit about in terms of what this could all mean in more specific terms for the United States and then in Massachusetts in a moment. And so I'm going to be focusing on research now that we conducted at the Union of Concerned Scientists. My colleagues and I at UCS worked together with a professor named Jana Batzoglu at the University of California, Merced, in a study that we published in 2019 that examined how the heat index, or feels like temperature, which is a combination of heat and humidity, which you might hear about in the weather forecast, for example, how that's likely to change under different global warming scenarios. And so these maps here are showing you the average number of days per year, historically on the top left, where the heat index exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And on the bottom, how many days historically exceeded 105 degrees Fahrenheit. The color bar, you can see the key on the bottom where yellow is 1 to 10 days per year, increasing all the way up to red, which is more than 100 to 200 days per year on average. And then the maps on the right are showing you for those same temperature values, how things are likely to change by mid-century, so in the coming decades, if we don't take action to reduce heat trapping emissions. And you can see very significant changes and expansion of extreme heat days across the country. Really the only places where we don't see big increases are at high latitudes, so like on mountaintops or yes, you can see the Rockies are doing okay in that respect, but much of the country, excuse me, much of the country sees really significant increases in extreme heat in the coming decades. Just waiting for it there. And now specifically in Boston, and I should say this report, including interactive mapping tools and other kinds of report materials, can be found at this web link that I have the URL at the bottom. And one of the tools that we have is where you can type in your location and you can see the projections for extreme heat for your community. And so in Boston specifically, we found that historically, there have been one day on average with a heat index above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. By mid-century, in a scenario in which we don't take action to reduce heat trapping emissions, that number would grow to 15. And by late century to 33, so more than a month's worth of such days on average. Huge changes. However, if we meet the Paris Agreement goal of limiting warming to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, we can limit the number of 100-degree days, well, I should say days above 100 degrees Fahrenheit to 8 per year on average. So we could spare Boston a huge number of extreme heat days if we can meet the Paris Agreement temperature target of 2 degrees Celsius. I wanted to highlight another impact focusing on Massachusetts. We conducted an analysis in, I believe it was 2017, that looked at the number of communities in the US at risk of being chronically inundated under different global warming scenarios. And we define chronic inundation as when high tide floods 10% or more of a community's usable non-wetland area at least 26 times per year, or on average every other week. So what you can see in this figure is the number of communities, or the extent, I should say, of communities at risk of being chronically inundated in Massachusetts in an intermediate sea level rise scenario over different time periods. So soon would be in yellow, and none kind of pop up under that time period. But at 2060 and 2100, you see a lot of communities coming online in terms of being at risk of being chronically inundated. So for example, more than 30% of usable land in Cambridge, Chelsea, Hull, and Revere would be chronically inundated by 2100, and roughly 15% of Boston. And again, that's an intermediate sea level rise scenario. So this figure is showing you the number of communities at risk of that chronic inundation under different global warming scenarios. So intermediates in the middle, but you can see the low sea level rise and high sea level rise scenarios to the right and to the left. And just for context, the low scenario would be the equivalent of limiting warming to about 1.8 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels. So a bit under the Paris Agreement 2 degrees Celsius target. And again, the URL for this report and resources you can find here. So now I wanted to talk about, now that I've spelled out a lot of impacts and a lot of things that look scary, I want to talk about what we can do. And so we have the solutions in hand. I just want to be clear about that from the outset. This isn't a situation where we are questioning what technologies it would take to solve the climate crisis. We know, for example, we need to foster the rapid deployment of clean electricity powered by wind and solar to cut heat trapping emissions and get off fossil fuels as quickly as possible, as the IPCC report said. And as I discussed earlier, as the IPCC report findings make clear, the choices we make today really matter. And we really need to be mobilizing support for bold climate action at all opportunities. So the solutions aren't myths and far-off dreams. They're things that we have in hand already today. And we've seen important commitments being made by the Biden administration that are putting us in the right direction, but we do need even more, and we do need the whole world to be working together on all of this. And we also, in addition to those kind of mitigation buckets, mitigation meaning cutting greenhouse gas emissions, we also need to be implementing policies that allow us to adapt to the changes in climate that we've already locked in, those we're already experiencing, and protect those of us who are most exposed and vulnerable, such as outdoor workers, pictured here, in addition to historically marginalized communities, children, and the elderly. And so we can definitely dig into different climate impacts and what it would mean to adapt, but I wanted to kind of lay out those two buckets of change that we need to be pursuing, those two kinds of solutions that I sort of see as related and distinct at the same time. And so the question that I wanted to pose here, and I hope again that we can have discussion around this, is how do we create change? And again, this relates to the exhibit. And this is kind of the title of the talk, Climate and Change, because I see "and" as a really important operative word in kind of life in general, but in terms of all the different solutions that we need to be pursuing here in the climate crisis. So I wanted to first start again by, first start by raising the question of how do we create systemic change? What are the systemic causes of the climate crisis? And one thing I wanted to start with there that I think is the elephant in the room and is really critical for everyone to consider is the findings of recent research, and I'm happy to share different publications. There's been a proliferation of them that have shown that the fossil fuel industry has known about climate change since at least the 1960s. And they took intentional measures, including by creating public campaigns to seed doubt about mainstream climate science in service of stalling action. And I would thus contend that one of the ways to create systemic change, and I think this is not just me, this is something that I've learned through my time at UCS, is by reducing the influence of the fossil fuel industry on both public discourse and our political system. And we see this happening through climate litigation. This is a way that the climate movement has been working to hold fossil fuel companies accountable for their role in the climate crisis. And so what this graph is showing you, it's from an article in the journal Nature showing climate related cases in the US and internationally. So the US and over time, starting in 2000 to present. So total number of cases in the US it's orange, all other countries in blue. And you can see the climate litigation has been growing and can affect the outcome and ambition of climate governance. And I'm just realizing I'm sharing an IPCC finding actually there that concluded, this made it into the latest IPCC report. They concluded that climate litigation is growing and can affect the outcome and ambition of climate governance, which is huge, huge. Previous IPCC reports did not talk about climate litigation. So the fact that it not only made it in, but that the report concluded about the role of climate litigation and its importance with respect to climate governance. And again, this really comes back to because it's addressing a systemic cause of the climate crisis. And so here I'm showing you a map of climate related cases around the country. You can see Massachusetts as a case, in addition to a number of other Northeastern states, in addition to communities and counties across the country. There was a recent Supreme Court hearing or a decision made. It just came out, what was it, yesterday or 2 days ago, in which there was a desire from the fossil fuel industry to have cases, these climate related cases heard in federal courts instead of more local state court systems. And typically the federal courts are more favorable for industries in terms of the decisions that are made. So there's been a desire in the climate movement to know, let's keep these cases in the state court systems where the lawsuits are generated. And I should also step back and say that the nature of these cases are things that are suing fossil fuel companies for the impacts that communities are incurring. They can also be for consumer fraud, for some of the deception that I talked about. And so a lot of the legal theory behind these cases and the nature of the lawsuits are based on state law and holding the companies accountable to state law. And so the Supreme Court actually ruled against the companies and decided, no, these cases, the ones that were at hand, including the Boulder County and San Miguel County cases, should stay in the state system. So that was actually a real win for the climate movement in terms of holding these companies accountable. And so, of course, this is one systemic cause and potential for change, but I think a really important one. So again, stepping back to that, how do we create change? I think personally, I see in the systemic realm, this as one really important vehicle. And then I wanted to place the question of, and is there a place for personal behavior change? Because I think there's been a real reluctance, not just reluctance, I don't think that's the right word, but nervousness of if we say there's a role for personal behavior change, does that let companies and politicians off the hook? If we should have all the pressure there. And I would say it's not just that, but there has part of that sort of public campaigning from the fossil fuel companies was to try to put the onus on individuals that the solutions to the climate crisis are on all of us and the decisions we make. They're just producing fossil fuels. It's us. We're buying it. We're burning it. And so it's our fault, if you will. And so I think, historically, there's been sort of a back and forth about how, is it really a good idea to put any emphasis on personal behavior change? But I did want to explore here a bit and dig into that of, can we hold space for both? Can we hold space for systemic change and personal behavior change? And how, to what extent and how do they relate and feed back on one another? Because the reality is what we eat, what we buy, how we travel, how we power our homes, all of these things matter. And many of us in the US, not all of us to be clear, but many of us do have some control over these things and these decisions. And so, what space is there for creating that kind of change? So the next question I wanted to pose is how, and this is really where I hoped we could have some discussion, because I don't necessarily have the answer to this of how do you get people to change their behavior. I would imagine there probably are psychologists who, engage in environmental decision-making, behavior change, who there probably is scientific evidence that's outside of my area of expertise to be able to dig into this. But as artists, as creative thinkers, I really would love to hear from you all about how do we engage in systemic change? How can we be a part of that? And I can speak a bit to that because that is part of what we do at UCS, but also how do we create behavior change? And so with that, I did want to say thank you and lead us into a discussion, but also I did want to put my contact information in here and a link to our website, ucsusa.org. And to say that our members, we have an activist network where we do have action alerts that in terms of the systemic change and how do you be a part of systemic change, that requires working together, in the same direction. And we have a lot of action alerts that we send out that have opportunities for contacting, for example, your representatives, your senators, pushing for more accountability on the fossil fuel industry, pushing for policymakers to commit to greater levels of ambition with respect to greenhouse gas emission reductions. And so I think that, that systemic change, there are opportunities out there already. UCS does try to create those opportunities for people to engage. We also do have a science network for anyone with a STEM background. You can also be a part of that. And yeah, you can find any of that at our website. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I would really love to engage in any questions you might have, and especially around that idea of the how do we create the change that to have the future that we hope for. And please, of course, bring in any questions that you want, or any reflections or anything that doesn't need to be contained to what I suggested.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for bringing such an urgent, serious. I mean, it's the challenge of the century, I feel, for humanity. And thank you for bringing it in a way that is palatable and very relatable. So, I mean, I don't want to, I mean, I would like to hear from other people regarding your, I'd say for my part, we already talked a few weeks ago, and I talked with some of the artists or other artists, including Adrian, who is here today. We were talking earlier. I believe that I'm all for, fossil fuel industry. If we could switch that, it would be magic and fantastic. But I also feel, because there is the pollution, there is the plastic, there are so many aspects about the environment too that are there embedded. So I believe that everything is, I mean, if anything, the solutions have to be multi-systemic. And also, I don't want to let go of the fact that personal, individual actions can have a big impact. It's a balance, I guess, but that's my opinion. And I guess you hinted to that. And how is, oh wow, we want to know how. I believe that we need to first tell people about it, like make sure that people who are hearing about climate crisis and they are like, yeah, I read about that, I know that. But for the art, I guess this is what I'm trying, right? Is trying to have the conversation, to be a catalyzer of change by bringing this subject to the conversation, and if possible, bring some possible solutions. But again, knowing that the solutions are multiple and very gray area. There is no black and white. In my opinion, there is no black and white. Everything is very gray. So we have to adapt and we have to act fast. And that's all I'd say now. And I'd like to hear from others how we can do it.
Thank you.
We've known about this problem for a really long time, and yet we haven't really addressed it. And we're kind of careening towards the window closing. We're already experiencing the effects of, of our negligence. I think it's really hard to get people individually to do anything. I think legislatively, if things are in place, it works better, but of course you have the lobbyists from the opposing side because they're protecting their financial interests. I think we're in for a wild ride. I think I don't think changes are going to come quickly enough, unfortunately. If one person stops using plastic bags, it doesn't really work unless the whole town does. or the city does, or the state does, or whatever the issue is. And there are so many issues. So I don't have any good ideas about this.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, it's really, and this is where personally I'll just share that I derive a lot of hope from, as odd as it might seem, the climate litigation space, because
Yeah.
you see the map lighting up and you see the growth in the cases, and you see divestment campaigns in, retirement accounts, universities pledging to get off of fossil fuels. It's signaling a change in both that public discourse, public opinion, and also in the role that the fossil fuel companies can really have, because the reality is they are influencing our political system and the legislations that we have been able to pass and enact. Of course, not everywhere. Places like Massachusetts have been more forward-leaning, but I do derive a lot of hope from that, and I do encourage you, please do feel free to join UCS and the pressure that we are putting on these companies, because I feel that sense of empowerment from working in partnership with other people can help that feeling of helplessness, because you feel, okay, I'm doing something here about this issue. But it is, when you see how wildly things can swing from, one administration to the next in terms of who's president, it can make your head spin. But again, this is where, okay, the court system is different from the executive branch. So things can continue in different administrations in that sense. So again, I sort of derive a lot of hope there.
Excuse me, the problem is time is of the essence, and we're not the only, we're a big part of the problem, but we're not the only problem on this blue marble.
Right. And I guess one question I have to on that note, and in reflection of your comments, is I wonder if any of you might be able to reflect upon important moments where, and there of course is an exhaustive and endless list of examples, I'm sure, but other issues that art has helped to spark critical dialogue that led to important change, and how, just sort of, Adriana, like drawing out some of what you had said about the role that art can play in this space, if we can kind of like elaborate on that a little bit more, I'd be curious.
Well, I think there's certainly lots of examples like the women's movement, civil rights movements, but I also think that young people are really energized by this subject, and I think they're going to keep putting the pressure on. And unfortunately, in this country, the bottom line is the bottom line. And as soon as there's money to be made from green, which there is, and people are doing it, that's part of our hope, is that there are all kinds of new companies coming up, installing heat pumps and recycling all kinds of things and composting and doing all this stuff. And if there's money to be made, and there is, then that's going to be another force for change, because we do live in a very capitalist society.
That's exactly where my mind has been lately. Like, to what extent can we truly solve the climate crisis by living in a capitalistic society? Where I don't know about all of you, but I will admit, during the pandemic, it was like this giant social experiment for me, just individually, on my own. Okay, what happens when I am not in relation and in connection with other people? I started consuming more, in part because it was just out of like quote unquote survival at first, like, oh, I can't go out of my house. I can't. So I'm just going to buy this thing online. And then it was like, wow, this is the only thing that's sort of making me feel connected to the outside world right now in this perverse way. And of course, that comes from a place of luxury to have the money to be able, not that I design everything and anything, but even just a little thing. And, you know, one thing that just so struck me was when my family, spent a few months in Argentina this winter, and you know, just the people live in a much stronger sense of community. And of course, it's a capitalistic society as well, but there's just a much stronger sense of community, I would say, at least where he comes from. I didn't buy hardly anything while I was there because my mind was just not, it was occupied by social connection. So how, you know, I've been thinking a lot about like, how do we create cultural change too? And how does that relate to behavioral change and to systemic change, corporate, political, like how much agency do we have over all of that?
Yeah, well, I'm also convinced, and we talk about that, Rachel. The last time we spoke, all the time when I kind of try to atomize or kind of go to the source, I conclude is greed. It's like the greed that is obviously worse unfortunately, in people that have the most. Sometimes, you know, the more that you get, the more that you want, the more that you waste, the more that you kind of care less because, oh, you know, I have the right to, because I work hard and I gain a lot of money and now, you know, I deserve going on a cruise or whatever. It's like you become a bit blind about the long-term consequences of this and compassion, the lack of compassion. So I kind of feel that, you know, if we were more compassionate, right? And that's I mean, I want to have hope. I want to inspire hope because I believe that hope, I don't know if I read about that or I'm convinced about that, but hope is the only way that we can create solutions. If we didn't have hope, I mean, might as well we go home. But I think that I do believe, I agree with CJ. I think that the youth, at least the youth that I hang with, the youth that I see, we're fortunate where we live here in Massachusetts, and some of the people that I speak in other states too, or other countries. I think they have a mentality shift, a cultural shift, but again, it's not as fast. And some of them don't have yet the power, and we won't be able. We cannot afford, you know, until they take more over. So in between, people have to vote, have to go out, have to continue writing letters, have to continue, you know, writing to representative, you know, ask as much as possible, support organizations that are doing something, and be united. And I guess I don't like to end up thinking that I need to talk to or preach to the choir. I wish there was a way that we could reach to other aisles, because that's, I feel, is where the systemic change can happen. But sometimes it is difficult. As an artist, even it's difficult, or as a scientist, or as a person, as a citizen of the world. It is complicated, but again, I mean, I guess we are talking, and hopefully this recording will be listened to by a lot of people, and everybody is like, again, creating a ripple effect. I commend what you do with the Union of Concerned Scientists. I think that instead of concern should be like really angry, very angry and disappointed. And but yeah, what you're doing is phenomenal. I think is super important.
Thank you. Yeah, and
it's important.
Thank you. I hope I'm leaving you all with the sense that, again, this operative word, and we do have not just the like literal technical solutions in hand, but also ways to create change through as an example, climate litigation, but of course, other policy mechanisms creating, and again, UCS isn't the only organization where you can join in, but I would share that in my own personal experience, working in partnership with other people where you can feed off of the energy, of course, it's a movement, you know, you're moving with other people. So I do see there is a lot of momentum, and there is obviously, as the IPCC report is showing, a gap in where we are and where we need to be. And so I think the movement is bending that curve. It has been effective in doing so. And, you know, there obviously is more change that needs to happen. And it is really interesting, you know, as you all have been speaking, I've been sort of thinking about, you know, what art has been able to do in terms of, as you've said, you know, creating, catalyzing conversations, and also perhaps identifying the vision for movements of where we want to go, of bringing people together and showing a path forward, and on and on. I mean, there's so many different ways. And so for me, joining all of you in this conversation is really interesting to stretch our imaginations for how we get to where we need to go. And I would really be excited to continue to hear from all of you about how we can work together, how artists and scientists can work together to both create the vision, but also chart the path forward.
Yeah, the solution. Yeah, that gives hope.
Yeah.
Working together.
Right.
And I agree that, again, having multidisciplinary conversations, right, is really the path forward to. Otherwise, it's again we talk to each other and we kind of, and then we come in a silo. And I mean, in my experience at work too, it's like, you know, when you talk to people that speak a different language or speak a different, you know, or even think differently, that's where the opportunity comes. So I'm all for that. I mean, as a group, we are trying to support several, you know, at least we promote supporting a lot of organizations. And I'd be happy to collaborate, you know, individually or as a group, I imagine.
That'd be cool.
So, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that would be very cool.
As an artist, sometimes I have trouble, I have to say, imagining solutions. It's a challenge. You know, and I feel like, oh, I should speak about solutions more. I mean, I try to speak through my science in a way, like trying to reproduce, you know, trying to spread information from the IPCC, from, you know, from reliable sources, from the US, UCS. But yeah, in the art, it is a challenge. I don't know, Adrian, since you're there too, how easy or not it is for you if you have tried that.
Tried what?
Creating solutions with art, like, you know, thinking about solutions.
Well, I did
So,
do. I have done postcard projects in conjunction with the work that I've done, and handed them out to people and asked them to write to their legislators.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I've
We
done
are
that.
We are implementing that in our next exhibit. We're going to be doing that at the Piano Craft Gallery in September. This is something that, a couple. So I commend you for doing that. That's great. It's a great way. I have to say also, having talked to other artists, sometimes the challenge it is a bit, in my experience, that there are people that perhaps don't want to be so involved politically. That they feel that the moment you start talking about politics, it's like, oh, you know, that is also an interesting topic or an interesting aspect of trying to, you know, to lead teams or to talk to people and try to,
The same in the sciences. Same in the sciences. It's a very big area of discussion about scientists engaging in activism and advocacy, direct action. What any of those mean, really? Which ones do people feel comfortable with? How do you maintain your quote unquote objectivity? Should we not? Where? How? Yeah. It's interesting to me to hear you say that in the art realm as well.
Yeah. And I think it's probably, yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say in the visual arts, you're not usually in the presence of the people who are responding to what you're doing. It's not like a theater performance or some, music. But there are ways that you can implement that. I mean, one of the pieces that I had also required a little bit of performance, and people would gather around, and it sparked discussion, and that worked very well.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of how, it could be used to challenge people, to think of what they would be willing to do, what they should do, what they want to do. Just like this conversation for me, I mean, I think even just this conversation, thinking really, what should we be doing? We can kind of it's very easy to keep doing the same thing. I'm not saying that that's necessarily what your performance was bringing up, but I'm just sort of imagining that could be one thing that an artistic piece could encourage. Just like we're trying to do on the scientific side. So what can in collaboration we draw out?
I think one of the biggest things we can do is keep raising our voices, because if you look around now, there are, at least in the visual arts, myriad of shows going on in all kinds of places on this subject. And I think if we can keep pushing it to the forefront of the conversation, and certainly as election time comes up again, and it just seems that we're getting so much support from venues of all kinds, museums and art centers that are supportive, and so many workshops and stuff. And I think so many artists are doing artwork about the very subject, which just adds another level to the voice.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I mean, for what you're doing in that respect, because as you say, you look at the women's movement, look at the civil rights movement, I mean, and how art helped further that and create that, so that you're all bringing these conversations and discussions to the forefront of people's minds.
There's that dance performance downtown La Mer, which is all about pollution in the water. Taking a kind of classical ballet and turning it into something new and topical, so that even people who go to the ballet can't escape from discussion of climate change.
Of course. There is and there is currently in Buenos Aires, actually, there was a Lithuanian company that had an amazing they have an amazing piece about the climate. That is an opera with performance. It's a very innovative. There will be a point of return exhibit at the Umbrella Art Center coming up in a couple of days or weeks, maybe a week. And it's true, as CJ was saying, there are a number of there are a number of exhibits, and there are a number of artists that are raising the voice. I still feel that, it should be like every day of the day, every day of the week, no matter if it's Earth Day or Ocean Day or whatever day, is like it should always be there up front. And I feel sometimes upset when people say, "Oh, it has happened to me." Like I approach them with the show for climate, and they say, "Oh, we already had one a couple of months ago." I'm like, "Okay, why having another one?" It's like, it should be the thing that we speak every day. but hopefully it will continue to change, and more museums and more venues. But certainly artists, including artists who are doing work with repurposed material, which is kind of a thing that I care a lot about, and that I know is a challenge, right? It's not, and I'm not saying that everybody should do it, but it's also another way of creating, a voice, the personal, voice through art that at least it speaks to me.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we shall overcome. We shall continue.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's hope in, even these conversations where you start to see the other people who are working on this issue too. You're not alone. You're working in a movement, in collective action with other people. I think that is powerful.
Thank
Hope
you
we
so much
continue.
for the
Thank
discussion.
you.
I'm sorry, I have to leave now, but thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
So thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And it was lovely. I mean, for a wonderfully difficult conversation, and it's a pleasure to get to know you more. And for sure, I will continue hanging with you.
Yeah, please. Awesome.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, CJ. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Adriana. Thank you, Rachel. That was great.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Have a lovely rest of the evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.